locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
Welcome, everybody, to Paying Radio. Tonight is April 23rd, 2017. I almost said 217. That would have been that'd have been like 1800 years ago. That's a fresh start to the show. So welcome to the show tonight. And tonight we have on Dr. Irena Scott talking about her new book, 70 Years of Lies, Disinformation, and Government Cover-Up. And we'll get to Irena in 1 second. My co-host Ken is here from the lovely state of Oklahoma. Ken, how are you doing today?
Hey, I am doing fine, thank you. Just a quick shout out. Do we have time?
Oh, we got time.
Hey, George and Patty, thanks for tuning in, and enjoy talking with you guys. And, of course, Marilyn and Dick and Rosemary Jessup over in jolly old England. Thank you for catching the show.
Very cool. And we got a couple shout-outs on my end, too. We got Tony listening in southeast Wisconsin, and our friend Kat, who's been a longtime listener of IRN, she's listening in the St. Croix Island, U.S. Virgin Islands. So she's a ways away listening to us, probably on the app or on a computer. How cool is that, Ken?
Hey, technology, there are certain aspects of it that are just outstanding.
And it only gets better. I mean, it's becoming a strange world. I mean, there'll be self-driving cars soon. There'll be crazy stuff like that. I mean, we'll be just sitting in the house having stuff delivered by Amazon by drone. So, there'll be a time.
But you know what's really strange, MJ?
What?
When the Pony Express ran from New York to Sacramento, California, it only lasted about 18 months. But if you mailed a letter in New York to San Francisco or Sacramento, it took approximately 5 days to get there by Pony Express.
And I was thinking you were going to say like 10 to 12 days. That's quicker than I would have thought.
Yeah, and Lorna, she works for the government, and I know she's tuned in. Get this, if you mail a letter today, standard delivery from New York to Sacramento, it'll take roughly 5 days. I mean, is that nuts or what?
Wow, the irony of that. Wow.
I know. Well, hey, there's so much for technology, but it's interesting that she could be listening in or catching a nap in today's technology.
Yeah, Ken, I'm surprised you didn't email me that joke, to the group. I was that's That's crazy, though. That's crazy. I mean, to think that, and some things we've advanced hundreds of thousands of years, and other things are still the same. I mean, that's how life is, I guess. How fun is that?
Yeah, and, Lorna, she always tells me, I told her that, and she goes, well, you know what? That's if it gets there at all.
Right.
It goes in the dead letter file. Who knows where it goes from there?
Oh, right. Exactly. So let's get to our guest tonight. Dr. Irena Scott received her PhD from the University of Missouri in psychology, did postdoctoral research.
No.
Sociology. Physiology.
Yeah.
Thank you for the correction. Did postdoctoral research at Cornell University, has been an assistant professor at St. Bonaventure University, and has done research and teaching at the Ohio State University, University of Missouri, the University of Nevada, and the Battelle Memorial Institute. She worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Aerospace Center in Satellite Photography, was a volunteer astronomer at Ohio State University Radio Observatory, and has taken flying lessons. Ken, we still got another paragraph. Hang in there. Her publications.
This is awesome.
Yeah. She's got a great resume. Her publications include books and works in scientific journals, magazines, newspapers, and she was correspondent for Popular Mechanics magazine. She served on the MUFON board of directors from 1993 to 2000, is a MUFON consultant in physiology. Did I get that right? Yeah. And astronomy, and a field investigator. She co-edited 8 symposium proceedings, has been a state section director for Ohio MUFON, was a founding member of the Mid-Ohio Research Association, MORA, and is a journal editor and has published UFO material in books and journals, including scientific journals. Well, Irina, welcome to the show. That's quite a resume.
Well, thank you.
And we're glad to have you. I'll just start with the first question. This is how we'll usually dig into our guests. What got you interested in the field of ufology?
Well, I was always in the field of science, and I'm not really in ufology. I'm more hobby of ufology. But what got me into it, I think, to start with, was I was always interested in astronomy. I think I was kind of born interested in astronomy. And so I couldn't get into astronomy because I was a female when I went to college and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I always had an interest in all kinds of things, such as physics. But I also have an interest in anything extraterrestrial, ET, such as UFOs.
So have you had any of your personal accounts yourself? Anything you've seen or you can't explain in the skies?
I think in one case, have you ever heard of the Marfa Lights?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Marfa is a town in Texas, and it's well known for a number of things. And one thing is Marfa Lights. And people see, for like maybe since the 1800s, people have seen unexplained lights. They're sort of repeat sightings of lights that are usually seen in the mountains south of Marfa. They even have a viewing area there. And I knew people that lived in the mountains, the Davis Mountains, north of Marfa. And I was staying with people that had a big picture window and a deck and everything. And the only town I could see was Marfa. So I spent a lot of time looking at Marfa. It was about 20 miles away, but I had a camcorder with a telephoto. So I was kind of amazed I could see it that well. And everything looked normal always, except for one night. And there was this big light over Marfa. And I saw it, and I thought, I'll run in and get my camera, and it'll be gone by the time I'm back.
Mm-hmm.
But it stayed. And I photographed it for around half an hour until I finally got bored and quit. Maybe I shouldn't have. But it was just a real bright light over Marfa. And so I think that was something I really couldn't figure out. I called the airport and asked, and they said nobody had seen anything. They didn't know anything about. But I think they closed at 5 o'clock, so they probably didn't.
Wow.
So that was one thing I couldn't explain.
Oh, wow. So you saw, well, that was a pretty long sighting duration too.
Well, I would think it was something normal if I saw all the time, but I just saw it that one time. It would very, very slowly blink on and off.
Huh.
And I got a good recording, so I still have the recording.
Yeah, somebody in chat did just ask too if you got a video. So, well, Starlight, there you go. She did get a video. Did you put that up in the public domain for people to look at, or did you kind of just keep it to yourself?
I put it on YouTube, but I kind of have a long YouTube video. I sort of went through the history of Marfa when I did it too, and I kind of need to just do the recording by itself. But it's on YouTube. I think I just called it the Marfa Light or something.
Oh yeah, okay. Ken, you have a question for her?
Yeah. Hey, Irina.
Uh-huh.
Do you think that the government is hiding information concerning extraterrestrial technology, visitations, craft, or whatever?
I think so, because a lot of other people besides me have looked into that. For example, Stanton Friedman, who just takes out pages and pages and pages of government documents that are blacked out. And even if there wasn't anything to UFOs, I think there would still be government cover-up, because it would show human technology as they explored UFOs. But yes, I think the government has hidden quite a bit.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that there's ample evidence and indications that that certain entities within the federal certain agencies anyway have a lot more knowledge as to what is transpiring with the ET, UFO, whatever you want to call it, arena. And I think NASA is one of them. I think there's been an awful lot of lens flares from the space station, and then you look at what's going on with the Russian astronauts that are coming out and talking about what they encountered in space. I mean, it seems to me that somebody's keeping their mouth shut, and there's a concerted effort as far as a cover-up goes. And that's my opinion, but I believe that.
Well, it's so hard to figure out, because I think there's been a cover-up for a long time. In fact, my book starts out with Kenneth Arnold and suggestions that the government was even covering up when the modern idea of UFOs first came out. But I think there's a lot of reason for cover-up. But I don't know why they're doing it, because it's 70 years old, and nobody has ever flown a UFO like people describe in their sightings. And so you'd think they'd sort of quit after a while, because I don't think they are getting secret technology, or else they would take over the world. So I don't really see too much reason for covering it up, but apparently they do.
Oh, right. Now, Irena, when doing research for the book, did you find anything pre-World War II, past 70 years for any cover-up? Was there anything that you discovered?
I didn't. I just started with the modern type, and I didn't want to go back into ancient astronauts, because they're really, it just wasn't my field or anything.
Sure.
What I started with was Cordell Hull. Mm-hmm. He was a statesman. He is called the founder of the United Nations, and Roosevelt wanted him to run as his vice president. So he was a big, well-known person, the longest Secretary of State I think they ever had. And we found he had a cousin, and we talked to the daughters of his cousin, and they said that they weren't supposed to talk about it until everybody died. Mm-hmm. But they said that this cousin went to see Cordell Hull, and Cordell Hull showed him this spatial place that was under the spatial room under the Capitol building, where they had 4 jars with bodies in them in formaldehyde, and something that looked like a crashed craft. And that was around 1939.
Oh, wow.
So it may have been that they had some idea back then that the government did. I mean, the modern type of idea that maybe they're from space or something like that.
That's one I've never heard. That's interesting, Ken.
Yeah, well, and I think that that goes back to the question of how much does the government know, and when did they know it? And I think that when you look at the historical stories, and a lot of it can be backed up can be verified, that we have I don't know that it started out as an intentional cover-up, Irina or MJ, but I think that it went down that road, and now it's going to be very difficult for them to admit, yeah, we were lying all these years about all this stuff. Okay, I mean, once you start down that road, you have to tell another lie to cover up that lie. And I'm sorry, but to our listeners, this is a drum I beat all the time. It becomes a constitutional issue. It really does. Because if what I suspect is true, and I think that goes along with Irina and most of the listeners, that there is a significant piece of the puzzle that's held by our government, and who gets to decide that they get to keep it to themselves if they have this knowledge? I thought we were supposed to be a free society and accountability.
Well, I don't
and
think we are.
And that's where the Constitution comes in.
I think one thing that caused the secrecy, I worked at Battelle Memorial Institute, and it's one of the top research organizations in the world. It's who developed this Xerox and different things like that. And worked on the Manhattan Project and is very active today. But I sort of learned about the history of classified projects there more than I did from other places. And I think before anybody had the idea of UFOs as technology or anything, that they had studies of foreign technology where they thought everything flying was from Russia or someplace like that. And so that information was classified and called foreign technology. Well, I think when UFOs came in, that they went into the same departments that were already classified for studying earthly technology. And I think they just were kind of born classified, the whole thing.
Interesting. Now, in your book, did you find anything Nazi-related, like World War II, with any cover-up, U.S. government cover-up? Because they claim a lot of the craft that was spotted in the U.S. was possibly, German or Nazi. Did you come across any information like that in the book?
Oh, some people explain it that way, but I don't think. I live close to Wright-Patterson, which has an Air Force base, which is very involved in UFOs. And I went through everything, and I couldn't find any evidence that they had anything like Arnold's reported. There were a lot of reports at the time when he saw his besides that. And I didn't see, they had some boomerang-shaped aircraft. I don't know if they had them right there, but they weren't very good at flying. And I didn't see any evidence that anybody had anything like that.
Well, the Nazis developed a rocket jet fighter, if you will. I think it was called the Horten brothers developed it, and it was a kind of a boomerang shaped craft. It took a rocket engine, then it would glide back to its base. It was highly ineffective. Okay.
Yeah, it didn't well.
What's that?
It didn't fly very well.
No, the flight characteristics, and not only that, but once it reached altitude and it made its run, it was very fast. Approaching, they used it for attacking bomber formations, and it was very, very fast. But the problem was that once they got up to 15,000, 20,000 feet, they lost their power, and the P-51 Mustang, which was the fastest prop-driven plane of its time, it was the apex of until the jet fighter appeared on scene. But that P-51 Mustang, they just knocked them out of the sky like clay pigeons. They were never ever a adequate threat. Okay, but they were boomeranged and they flew very fast.
Well, they weren't the shape of what Arnold and some of the rest described, because his were kind of crescent shaped. And the Horten brothers were more like boomerang shaped, and that wasn't described by the sighters. Right.
No, and I think that Kenneth Arnold had a legitimate sighting. Don't you, Irina?
Yes, I think so. And
Yeah, I think he's the real deal.
well, I started out with my book mainly with Kenneth Arnold because I thought he seemed to be a very honest man, concerned whether people believed him. And, he wanted to be honest and to make sure people knew he was. But besides that, he was very well qualified as a pilot, and he was also very logical and intelligent. So I found his book by accident years ago. I just thought I was in a used bookstore, and there were all these glamorous books. It was in the 1970s, and I was looking at them. It was back when people actually read books. And I found this old book that looked like nothing, and I pulled it out and looked at it, and it was by Kenneth Arnold. And I thought, this is boring. This is, he saw a flying saucer. But for some reason, I just couldn't put it down. I took it home. And it was just amazing because what he described was kind of like the things that happen today. And it was pretty amazing. It wasn't just some boring thing, because he had quite a few things happen to him that were really odd after he had the sighting. It seemed like the government was there was supposed to be a hoax, but it seemed like instead of just a simple hoax as presented, the Murray Island hoax, it was a very, very complex one, as I kept reading.
Yeah,
and that made me think there was something going on a long time ago.
Right. That is a complex case. You are absolutely correct. Nothing like them used bookstores. I found a couple gems in them too. You just go in there and you hit a certain section in these used bookstores, and you're like, jackpot, $2.50. You're out the door with a good old fashioned. It could be anybody, even an old Stanton Friedman one or anything. It's kind of a nice discovery when you come across something like that.
Yeah, I've got a paperback written by Major Donald Keyhole. Flying saucers are real.
Oh,
I had that too. Somebody gave me
it's a fascinating read.
Yeah.
Okay. And I've been saying this all along, MJ. I've said it numerous times on the show that the historical data that has been compiled over the years is extraordinary. I think the evidence is overwhelming that that there is something going on. Not only that, but our government, and I don't want to just pick on the United States, because I think there are other governments. I think the Soviet Union, China, they withhold information concerning this topic. I think that there is actually a worldwide, I don't know if you want to call it a cover-up, but certainly a effort to not reveal the facts or the truth.
Well, what was interesting to me was I'm trying to read all the current things, but what was interesting to me was in the beginning, right at the beginning, such as Kenneth Arnold and back then, I kind of studied that because I don't think the government knew exactly what they were doing, and I think the government was kind of divided. I think there was someplace in Washington that was running things and really knew about it, but it was secret. And where they interfaced with the public was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they kind of tried to give the impression that this represents a government when it probably didn't. But I thought the old information was very interesting because you can kind of see parts of the cover-up happening and developing, which you don't today because it's probably a real smooth operation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, back then it was in its in the beginning stages. So, yeah, you're going to see a lot more raw stuff and kind of catch it. That does make a lot of sense. Now,
I thought it was pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned, you also mentioned Roswell in your book, correct?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. So go ahead.
Oh, we had some new information about Roswell that we have. The book's embargoed because we haven't published it and don't want to until the book comes out. But I don't know if people are too aware, but Roswell happened right after the Kenneth Arnold sighting.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of funny because they had the top military organization in the world, I think, because the 509th Squadron at Roswell was who dropped the atomic bombs, the bombs on Japan. And they were really high-class, elite department. But you'd think they first of all announced that there was a UFO that crashed. And I was at Roswell and talked to some of the people, including the daughter of the person that made the announcement. And the authorities told him to make the announcement. Everybody was behind it. Then soon after that, they said, oh, nothing happened. Well, these people ought to know a balloon, it seems to me.
Yeah.
I mean, they were, if they can drop an atomic bomb, they ought to recognize a balloon.
Oh, yeah.
And so it seemed to me like that there was something pretty fishy about that they were covering it up. And it was so soon after Arnold that you wondered exactly what was flying around, and there were a number of sightings. So I just didn't know, but it seemed, fishy.
I think that Werner Braun Vaughan and his team of scientists at White Sands, New Mexico, had a sighting of several crafts 6 days before the Roswell incident. That's kind of, and I'm just dovetailing what you were saying, Irina, that there was prior to and immediately after Kenneth Arnold sighting and the Roswell incident, there was a lot of sightings in and around the American Southwest.
Well, there were, and at first it didn't make the newspapers because nobody had the concept or idea of flying saucers and UFOs. The newspapers probably didn't know what to report, but they've gone back and collected information from newspapers, and there were quite a few sightings, very good sightings. For instance, at Kenneth Arnold's sighting, there was a prospector on the ground at the same time he saw these objects go past, and what the prospector reported was he had a telescope and he looked at one of them. But he also said that as they were approaching him, his compass began to spin. And that would certainly be different from a regular United States aircraft or anything like that. And it seemed to be a very good report, too.
Oh, interesting. I've never heard that. Cool.
I think his name was Johnson.
Okay.
And he saw it the same time Arnold did.
Well, this is a good segue, guys. We're going to take our first break. You're listening to Dr. Irina Scott talking about her upcoming book, 70 Years of Lies, Disinformation, and Government Cover-Up, and we'll be right back.
You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
Welcome back, everybody, to Paying Radio. Tonight we have on Dr. Irina Scott talking about her new book, 70 Years of Lies, Disinformation, and Government Cover-Up. Great discussion on the break again. Of course, you all missed it. And Ken, let's hit up Irina with that question you were talking about on break.
Yeah, let me just apologize to our listeners and people in chat because we get into some really good conversation. We don't take a break. And one of the questions I asked Irina was that she indicated on the Kenneth Arnold sighting that some peculiar things happened to Arnold after his sighting concerning the government, and that's what started down the path of talking about the quality of person. And Irina, you said it better than I did, so why don't you go ahead and explain what we were talking about concerning the witness?
I had the impression that he was very honest. He seemed to be very concerned about whether people believed him, and he collected the information and gave like his pilot's number and everything else. He was a very experienced pilot. He seemed to be an extremely credible person. That's why I found the book by him, and I just followed what he said, because there's a lot of other ideas that were going on. And, you know, if you listen to a whole lot of ideas, you don't know where they're from, and they may be from the government, they may be people that don't know anything about it or are making it up. So I just followed him because he seemed like a very honest, logical, intelligent person. But all these weird things happened to him that he reported, and at the time, it was when people trusted the government. It was he wrote the book in the early 50s, and he had been, right after his sighting, a person hired him to go look at this other report, the Murray Island report. People think it's a hoax by two people that were pretending to be harbor patrolmen. But as I read the book, which I read it first of all in the 1970s, and I read it a number of times after that, in today's world, it would look a whole lot different, because back then when things happened to them, it seemed weird. They would just say, oh, this is just happenstance, this is coincidence, because everybody trusted the government and thought everything, official word was official and everything. Now, if you read this thing and you don't trust the government, well, it sounds a lot different. And for example, he was very concerned about things because he was logical. And he had seen these things. He had a good observation. He knew where the mountains were, and he saw these objects going around the mountains, and he could time them and had a good idea of exactly where they could be and a good estimation of what they were doing. But so he reported it, and things became strange right away, because you would expect the government would be very concerned about this, because he reported a speed that was way beyond anything anybody had. But what happened was that he reported it like his sighting was, I think it was June the 24th, and he didn't hear from anybody in the government until the middle of July. And he thought that was pretty amazing, because the government should have instantly interested in that. And things just kept going like that, and making me think something was pretty fishy from the start. So anyway, and I just had a whole list of things that just didn't make sense at all.
There's your answer, Ken.
Well, you know, and it was going to what we were talking about in terms of the quality of witness. I mean, you know, Arnold, not only was he a professional businessman, but he was an accomplished pilot. Mm-hmm. And he was a very intelligent person. I mean, even to the point where he took a pen or a grease pen on the windshield of his plane, and he marked, that's how he was able to compute the speed of the objects, because he was able to time how far they went from point A to point B, and he marked them on his windshield, and he basically knew what the distance was, and he was able to compute fairly accurately, maybe not to the you know, the exactness that we could do today, but he was fairly accurate in his estimation of the speed of these objects. And we were talking during the break that it seems, and I think there's been a number of studies, that the more qualified the witness and the longer they have contact with the object, the more that it becomes, you know, an unknown. The better the data that is gleaned from, you know, from the report. And eyewitness testimonies from astronomers, astronauts, pilots, police officers are all excellent sources of data, because they're qualified as witnesses in judging certain aspects. Doesn't make them perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly gives them a lot better data from the aspect of what it is that they're observing, because of the detail that they're able to supply. And I think that Kenneth Arnold falls into that category. I mean, the guy was a very good observer, and he saw what he saw. And it's interesting. It's interesting, Irina, that some of these strange occurrences started happening. Like we were talking during the break. Like his phone was probably being tapped. He was probably being. I'm sure. I don't know if the FBI was involved in it, but military intelligence certainly was. I'm sure.
Well, one thing about the wiretapping was that this person had hired him to fly and investigate this Murray Island incident. Well, he wasn't real interested in doing it, but he finally decided to, and the person had sent him money and everything. So he took off in his airplane without telling anybody, no flight plan, no radio or anything. And when he got to, I think it was Tacoma. Anyway, when he got to the place he was going, he couldn't find a motel. He looked all over and couldn't find anything. So just as a lark, he called the most expensive hotel in town, and they had a room reserved in his name. And that, back in those days, it just seemed like a coincidence, but it doesn't now. But anyway, he decided there must be another Kenneth Arnold, and he couldn't find a room, so he decided to stay there. Well, no Kenneth Arnold ever showed up. And just things just started immediately happening that were weird. For example, he was going to interview these people that had the sighting, and he found the person's name in the telephone book in the hotel. Well, not too long later, he was looking for the phone number of the man, and the operator said no such man was there. And it makes you wonder, did somebody manufacture a phone book for his room? Because he got the person when he had the phone directory, but he couldn't find any evidence of him later. And about the wiretapping. Hello?
We're here.
Hello?
Yeah, we're here. Are you there?
Yeah. About the wiretapping. He and commercial pilots that had also seen the similar UFOs from commercial airlines, and the crew and everybody had this sighting. He made friends with this man, and they were staying in the hotel room while investigating, because he knew he was over his head and he wanted help, which is a very intelligent thing to do. So they were in this hotel room, and they were interviewing these two people that reported this other sighting. Well, they found out that the newspaper, the local newspaper there, was getting a report from an informant that was telling him everything that went on in his room, and all four of them were there. So it didn't come from any of them, and it appeared to come from a bug. I think that back in those days they thought bugs were kind of big, and they called them a dictaphone. And they looked all over the room; they couldn't find anything.
Oh, sure.
But if it were the government, they probably had, smaller things, or they had the room wired someplace. And a lot of things like that happened. Right.
We're starting to get a few questions in chat here. I am going to scroll back up here 1 second from our friend Dan. Dan wanted to know, do you think any of the research you've done, any of the technology was reverse engineered from any of the research you did in the book?
I don't know. Because I don't know. Actually, I don't know what UFOs are, what the UFO phenomena is. And they always say it's technological, such as rocket ships or airplanes. But I'm not too sure if that's what it is.
Right.
And so when they say, are these reverse engineered, they're talking about rocket ships. And maybe this is just something totally different from rocket ships that would be very difficult to reverse engineer.
And we have another question, too. This is getting into the 52 flap over Washington. Our friend Neutron wants to know, Irina, what insights do you have on the details that President Truman assigned the whole UFO case to the Bilderberg CEO of Skunkworks Incorporated following the UFO flap above Washington 1952?
Did that come from the MJ-12?
I believe so.
Yeah, I would say that it probably comes from the Avery, the 12 people that were a member of the MJ-12.
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't studied that very much because I'd worked for the government, and I know actual government documents, you can verify them. And with the MJ-12 papers, I never found any evidence that you could verify on them, so I didn't know whether they were true or whether they were just made up. I mean, somebody went to a great trouble to make them up, but I just didn't follow them too much because I just didn't know whether I was barking up the wrong tree or something. So I don't know about that. I think it came from MJ-12, but I just couldn't answer.
Hey, Irene, when did Roswell have his sighting? Was it a few weeks before Roswell?
Oh, you mean Arnold?
Excuse me. Yeah, thank you, Arnold. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Arnold was June the 24th. I think Roswell was around July the 7th, so it wasn't very far away.
A couple weeks, yeah.
Well, that's and that's really interesting from the Roswell standpoint, because you're having all of this activity that's occurring in that area. Like I said earlier, the American Southwest, and then we have the big Roswell incident. But I didn't realize, and I stand corrected to the people in chat, because I thought it was 45 is when he had his sighting. I didn't realize it was that close to the Roswell incident.
Well, I think most people think of these as two totally different things, but actually they were quite close in time.
Yeah, I think there's, not knowing that prior to, I think there's a relation. I think the Roswell and Kenneth Arnold sighting are probably connected. Whatever crashed in Roswell was probably one of the craft that Kenneth Arnold saw a few weeks prior to, in my opinion.
Well,
but yeah,
wonder, because a lot of people had sightings then. I mean, I know the government was testing out all kinds of new things too, but a lot of these sightings weren't like anything the government would have been making, because the world.
And guys, it seemed like back then it wasn't really civilian sightings. It was more or less government or local police that were seeing this type of stuff, reporting at sheriff's departments. You don't get very many civilian testimonies, and back then it's all
you know what, MJ, you're right. Yeah. And I think and Irina touched on it earlier. We were still on a war footing in 47. Okay, World War II was over in 45, and we were, as far as a country goes, and the military, we were still on a war footing, which means that the military basically were doing all the flying. Commercial air travel was not. It's not that it didn't exist, but it certainly wasn't on the level that the military was flying. You look at all the sorties that they flew domestically, and I'm talking about the United States Army Air Corps, the Navy, was tremendous. And so it stands to reason that those sightings would come from those types of pilots. Radar was a military thing, and it was being employed and developed down in the desert Southwest, down by Roswell. And and then of course we have the development of the atomic bomb and the nuclear Air Force Station at Roswell. I mean, it all fits together. I mean, it makes sense. And then Roswell has his sighting 3-4 weeks prior to the Roswell incident. I think they're connected. I agree with you, Irina. I think there's a link.
Well, what happened with the Roswell was that Kenneth Arnold sighting was very famous for a while, and it seemed like the government kind of covered it up and took it out of the news, not too long afterwards. But nobody knew about the Roswell event. It happened, and they said, oh, no, nothing crashed, nothing happened, even though it said it was crashed. And it wasn't until, that was 1947, right after Arnold's sighting, and Roswell didn't become well known until 1980, when several people went back investigating and reported it. So at first, the Kenneth Arnold sighting was the most famous and everything, but now most people have heard of the Roswell event, and it's better known than Kenneth Arnold's.
Yeah, it does kind of put a Kenneth Arnold sighting in the shadow, but I mean, he's the first person that did he not coin flying saucers? Was he not the person that coined flying saucers?
No, he didn't. It was a news. It was a news reporter that
wrote an article about him, right? Is that?
Yeah. Said they skipped like a plate skipping across the water.
Yeah.
And the reporter put down flying saucer. Arnold described it as a plate skipping across the water, as how the maneuverability of the craft, and the reporter coined the phrase flying saucer. I think that's how it went down. What's that? I'm sorry.
Well, people after that thought of them as saucer shaped, and what he saw really wasn't even saucer shaped. It just skipped and flew like a stone skipping across the water.
Yeah, he didn't. You're absolutely correct. As I understand it, he didn't describe him as being saucer shaped. What he described it as, like if you skipped a stone across the water, like a plate across the water. But he was describing the flight characteristics of the craft, not what the actual craft looked like.
Yes.
And so the reporter put down flying saucer, and that's what we have today. And it's interesting, the term UFO, that comes from the United States government also. That was deliberate and brilliant. I mean, I got to take my hat off to them, and I give them a salute, because they apply the term UFO, which stands for unidentified flying object. And when you put unidentified on there, it can be anything from a balloon to a meteor to an unidentified aircraft to, spider webs in the sky. And that gives the government an out every time, and so we continue to use that term, which frustrates the hell out of me. Okay, it does, because if you have a witness and they describe a metallic craft, it's either triangular or saucer shaped. It's not identified. They've identified the damn craft. We just don't know who built it and who's flying it. But we call it a UFO. Okay, and that. I try to refrain from using that term because it's so damn generic and it paints with such a broad brush. But when you have people like Kenneth Arnold, Major Marcel, you have really qualified witnesses, and they're giving you detailed description of what they're looking at. It's not a UFO. It's an IFO. They're identifying the craft. Okay, they can pick it out in a lineup as a suspect. Okay, they know what they saw, and it's very specific, and therefore it's not a UFO. But thanks to Uncle Sam, we continue to apply that term, and it really gives skeptics a way out, because it's unidentified. They didn't identify it. They saw a light in the sky and blah blah wee, and it could have been anything. Well, when you really look at the detailed description by the witness, it's not just anything, it's very specific. And Kenneth Arnold was very specific in his description. I mean, on the cover of one of the magazines, he was able to, he depicted the crescent-shaped craft that he witnessed, that he saw. And I think that's what crashed in Roswell. Whatever was going on, one of those buggers came down.
Well, it's possible.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Because they should have identified a balloon.
Well, hey, I have a question. I've asked Stanton Friedman this. Lorna, you know I have asked Kevin Randall this. And I have yet to receive a satisfactory explanation. And so I will ask our guest tonight, Dr. Scott. And keep in mind, my background's law enforcement. I'm just a flat-foot, simple-minded, keep it simple, stupid detective. Okay, so you got to help me with this. Okay, all right. I approached the subject of flying saucers and ET by who, what, where, when, why, and how. Okay. Now we can answer all the questions based upon the government's explanation on the Roswell incident. Okay, we know when. All right, July 7th, 1947, July 11th, whatever, but July 1947. And we know where, Roswell, New Mexico. Okay, what I want to know is why. The why bugs the shit out of me. Okay, why did the government initially tell us, we know what, it's either a freaking flying disc, as they called it, or a balloon. Those are the two explanations that the United States government gave us. And I'm going on their testimony, not anybody else's. Okay, so my question is, why on God's green earth did the United States Army Air Corps tell the world that they had recovered a flying disc at one of the most secret bases in the entire United States? Furthermore, if you look at what's going on in rockets, nuclear, and radar, all of that area within about a 500 square mile radius of Roswell was very top secret, hush-hush research going on. And all of a sudden, the United States government tells everybody, hey, we got a flying disc, and the entire spotlight was pushed on New Mexico. Why did they do that? Why would you compromise Dr. Wernher von Braun and his research at White Sands, New Mexico? The United States Navy was trying to develop, are you ready for this, Doppler radar in New Mexico, and you had the 509th Bomber Wing stationed at Roswell, which was the only freaking nuclear air force in the entire world. And the United States Army Air Corps tells the entire world that they had captured a flying disc. And that story resonated, depending on what resources, 8 hours, 12 hours before they, went oops, and it was nothing but a balloon.
Ken, guess what? We're gonna take a break right now, and after the break, we will have Irina answer your question. How about that?
Yeah, I need a good explanation, man. I do.
This gives her time to think about it on the break, so we'll be right back with Irina Scott. Hang in there, everybody.
You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
Welcome back, everybody, to Paying Radio. Tonight we have on Dr. Irina Scott talking about her forthcoming book, 7 Years of Lies, Disinformation and Government Cover-Up. I'd like to do one more shout out to our friend Juan D. listening in East Houston, Texas. He listens to IRN and he told us to mention Go Rockets, so must be a big Houston Rockets fan. Good for him, and thanks for listening there, Juan D. Okay, Ken, going to hand it back to you for a second, and you got this big question you wanted to ask her, and go to it.
Yeah, and I know that there's a number of retired law enforcement officers that are listening to the show, and they understand where I'm coming from, and that is, why did the government tell everybody that they captured a flying disc, and then, of course, the story changed to a balloon? Why would they even make that statement? Why would they tell the world that they have captured one, Dr. Scott? Do you have any idea on that?
Well, what I looked for was something that seemed very credible. And the part that seemed credible to me was that after the sighting, they said they sent the material to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And what seemed the most credible of everything to me was that there was an announcer on the radio telling what was going on, and he said right while he was on the radio that he had called Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they were expecting the delivery. And that, is a smoking gun because it shows they were sending something to Wright-Patterson. I mean, that pretty well will establish that.
Well, yeah, hey, once again, I'm a simple guy. And you got to think, at some point in time, from the time that Major Clark and Captain Cabot went out to the ranch to the time that they loaded it on a craft and sent it to the general and then shipped it up to Wright-Pat, that somebody, a private first class, would have said, guys, this is a balloon.
Well, that's what I would think, too, that if it were a balloon, I mean, I'm sure they sent something because of that call. I mean, I heard it at Roswell when I was there. They had a recording of it, of the whole thing. And so I don't think they'd send a balloon to Wright-Patterson. Maybe they would, but that didn't make sense. And so I thought something was actually going on, but not what they said. Once I was at Wright-Patterson, I was talking to some people there, and they said that they knew I think it was the son of the person that flew the airplane to Wright-Patterson, and I had his name, but I didn't look him up, unfortunately, which was pretty stupid. And so I might have found out more about it then. But from the reports, it sounded like they sent quite a bit of material, which wouldn't be a balloon. I mean, I forget how. A person and I went in, and they sent it, I forget the B-20 something, to Wright-Patterson. And they sent it in the, it was a bomber, and they apparently specially made crates and sent it, since it was a bomber, it doesn't carry cargo. And so they made specially shaped crates that fit inside the bomber. And these were fairly large. It seemed like larger than a balloon, which didn't seem logical to send anyway. So a person and I went into Wright-Patterson, he had a cutout of that type of airplane, and measured. And the measurements they gave in some of the literature were correct. You could make a crate and put it in the bomber bay of the airplane, and it would fit. So they must have not had a cargo plane to send it in. And it sounded like there was more than a balloon sent from that,
yeah.
too.
Oh, yeah. Now, what other cases did you work on in the book that really kind of piqued your curiosity? Is there any that stand out besides Roswell and the Kenneth Arnold incident?
Well, there's many, many, many that stand out. From today on back.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was the Portage County one in Ohio, and this was where the authorities said that in Benton Harbor, Michigan, that somebody had seen some kind of an object, and some people, two police were in Ohio, and they heard the news over the police radio, and they laughed at it. But then they were supposed to go, and the name was Deputy Starr and Mounted Deputy Neff. I don't know if you've heard of the Portage County UFO, but this was a chase that went over 2 counties, and the sheriffs were in contact with the authorities the whole time it happened. The sheriffs heard it over the radio, and they laughed about it. And then they were supposed to investigate a car that was off the road or something, and they did. And they saw this big thing over them. It was really bright and pretty much terrified them. And they ran for their car and got on the radio and started reporting it to their station by the radio. And the first thing the station said was, shoot it. Well, they didn't think that was a very good idea. So they followed it, and they followed it from Ohio into Pennsylvania, and there were a whole lot of witnesses. I guess the switchboards had just lit up with people reporting this thing. And not only that, but there were reports that they scrambled jets to chase it. The object seemed to be interactive because they said that it would, when it went over a city, it would go to a higher altitude and then come down. And they said that sometimes if they got behind it, it would just sit there and wait for them to catch up. So it was a big interstate chase with a lot of policemen and everything else. And so all these witnesses reported, they even had a senator, I think, standing up for the reports and everything. And they reported to Wright-Patterson, and the head of Blue Book said, well, they were idiots and they saw Venus and a satellite. This had taken hours. All kinds of people had seen it. Sheriffs and all kinds of authorities had seen it. And so it became a laughing event, even though it was very real. It sort of ruined the lives of several of the witnesses, too. So that was a Portage County sighting, but it was of an interactive object that a number of people had chased across 2 states, and maybe seen in 3 states, and maybe seen later than that in Massachusetts, where the people that were following it were actually communicating with the authorities, and they saw jets taking off and everything else. And it was explained away to the government that nothing happened. They just saw Venus, and that was it. So I thought that was a very good case. It was in the 1960s.
I've heard a little bit about that. Think if that happened today, versus the Phoenix Lights, that would be there wouldn't be much stop. How would they stop the government from all these people viewing it with all the technology and all? But that sounds like it. If that would have had the possible coverage and viewership, because it is an older case, that could have been as big as the Phoenix Lights, Irina.
Well, I think it would have been bigger because they had so many witnesses, plus jets taking off and airports. It was on an airport radar, and it would have been very big if they, in today's world, when it's harder to cover up things.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was a real good stuff, but it was covered up.
Well, Pigpen brings up a great point in chat, and it's thanks to modern technology, we now know what the Twix was being held in the general's hand when he made the publicity statement and the photograph was taken. Okay, and in that Twix, it is 98% that some of the words in it talks about bodies, flying disc, that he's holding in his hand.
You mean the Roswell?
Yeah, in the Roswell, right.
Where did that come from, that information?
You can go down to the Roswell Museum, and it shows, and I forget the professor that is doing the research on it, but they've looked at the Twix or the memo of, was it General Ramey? Is it General Ramey that's kneeling on the floor, and he has the teletype Twix in his hand, and there's a picture taken of him, and I think it's Jesse Major Marcel holding the balloon fragments that they're making the publicity, the changing of the story. But in that Twix, they have deciphered that there are words, and it's like 90 to 95%. It's called the Ramey Memo, I believe. And it refers to words like disc, bodies, crash, that they've been able to decipher.
Yeah, I remember that. I didn't know they had deciphered that much, though.
It's pretty telling. It doesn't get a whole lot of publicity, but with today's technology, you got to think that they're probably pretty close. If the computer's saying that, hey, you have there's only 7 matches that would fit into what they've been able to decipher some of the words for sure, and then based upon that. It's saying that, okay, you have like 7 words and one of them is disc, the other one's bodies, crash. Yeah, it's pretty telling.
That's interesting about the bodies, too, because that's what we're reporting in our book when it will come out, is the deputy sheriff who went with the sheriff said that he saw a crash near Roswell, and that there were 4 bodies there. But I can't go into detail on it, but that kind of agrees with some of the other things, that this was a more complex thing than a balloon.
Oh, yeah, the skeptics make a big deal. Well, it wasn't a weather balloon. It was a Project Mogul or whatever, and they have to explain the amount of debris that was witnessed, okay, by Major Marcel. So they had to pardon the pun, but they had to inflate the balloon to make it a bigger balloon. Well, the material that was used on Project Mogul wasn't anything top secret. The mission was, none of the equipment was top secret. I mean, it was basically, they were recording devices to record nuclear explosions, and the Soviet Union would send out a specific radio signal, and they would would record it, and that's how they would know that the commies had split the atom, if you will. But the equipment wasn't top secret. In fact, I think some of it had a placard on the side of it as, if you find, please notify your local law enforcement or the nearest military base. I think, and they gave them a phone number, okay, to call, for Christ's sake. So the equipment was nothing exotic. Certainly Marcel was familiar with that kind of equipment, for Christ's sakes. I mean, he was a bomber pilot during the war, for crying out loud. And so he would be familiar with, what he encountered out there in New Mexico was something that he had never encountered before. And that goes back to my question. Why would they tell us that they had recovered a disc, Doctor? Why would they do that? I have a theory on it, but that's all it is. But I'm looking for other explanations, because it doesn't seem logical that they would turn the light switch on an area of the country where they were doing all this top secret experiments and development. I mean, telling the world that, you had the Kenneth Arnold sighting, and now you tell the world that the U.S. Army has captured a flying disc. I mean, Stalin told his boys, you get your ass on a boat and get over and see what those Americans have found. It makes sense.
Well, that's why I was so interested in that to start with, especially the Arnold sighting, was that all that happened all together. And the government, it seemed to me like when Arnold had his sighting, that the government knew something about it, and there was a very complicated situation right there. But they were developing their cover-up also, so there were a lot of glitches. And the agencies didn't seem to agree with each other. Some of them thought one thing and some of them thought another, and it seemed like they weren't agreeing very well. And another thing interesting about the Arnold, there were a number of interesting things, but there were deaths too, which is highly interesting, was that when Arnold was in Tacoma investigating this Murray Island event, there were 2 government people that had talked to Arnold several times. I think their name was Brown and Davidson. I think one was a captain. They had seen Arnold, I think, in July after he reported they came from Hamilton Field in California, and talked to him about it. And he seemed real interested in UFOs, which doesn't happen now because the government is debunking everything. So they were sort of amateurish. And they told Arnold that if he had anything to report further to him, to call Brown at his office in Hamilton Field. Well, what was funny was that when he started investigating this, he wasn't somebody that just went, I mean, he was a very conscientious person and asked people for help. And he called Davidson in his office, the military office, and Davidson told him to hang up and called him back from someplace else beside his office. And that sounded really funny to me, that he couldn't talk to Arnold from his military office, even though he was the person that was investigating UFOs. That there was something funny going on with the government, because why couldn't he talk on his own office phone if he was supposed to be investigating UFOs and Arnold had called him? But 2 days later, he and the other person died in a plane crash. So that seemed very funny. But anyway, there was a whole funny situation going on at that time, because there wasn't very much time between the Arnold sighting and the Roswell thing. And the Roswell thing was covered up real fast, but the Arnold sighting, they tried to cover it up, but they didn't. But something was going on that was funny. And so I just don't know. It seemed like there were different parts of the government that seemed to be working against each other to the point where they killed somebody. So I just don't understand the picture, but I was trying to list a lot of evidence that seemed very odd. So I can't answer that, but the government didn't seem to be working very smoothly at the time of Roswell, which is right after the Arnold sighting.
Well, I've said this a number of times, and it's strictly a hypothesis on my part, because that question, why, bugs me. It really bugs me. And here's my hypothesis. I think that things that, and I only go by, there's a lot of mud that's been thrown into the Roswell story and all kinds of accusations, this, that, and the other, and I just go by what the government's telling us, okay? And we have a first-hand witness in Jesse Marcel. We have a second first-hand witness in Jesse Marcel Jr., because he drives and wakes. I talked to Marcel Jr. I had him on the show, and I talked to him probably totally over several years, close to 2.5, 3 hours. He was 11 to 12 years old when his dad woke him up at 2 o'clock in the morning to show him pieces of a balloon. Okay. And so my hypothesis is that the rancher, I'm having a brain fart. His name was
Brazel, I think.
Brazel, Mac Brazel. Okay, came into the sheriff's department, drove his truck in there. Okay, a couple of days after he found the debris while out checking the sheep or cattle or whatever, and he tells the sheriff, he says, I think that one of the Air Force's planes crashed. He didn't use the term flying saucer. He didn't use the term UFO. And the sheriff called the base commander, Colonel Blanchard, and sent Marcel and Captain Cavett out there, because Marcel told the base commander, hey, none of our planes are up in the air. He was able to account for all of his bombers and planes. And he makes a statement. Yeah, he makes a statement that it may be civilian, but he goes out there expecting to find aircraft parts. And so they pick up Mac Brazel at the sheriff's department, and he drives him out to the crash site, to the ranch, and that's when they're exposed to this exotic material, whatever. And so they're driving back to Roswell, back to the sheriff's department to drop off the rancher. He's sitting in the back seat. He's overhearing the conversation between Marcel and Captain Cavett. And you can imagine. I wasn't there, but I can imagine that these two officers are probably, holy shit, we got something here beyond our comprehension. And so Brazel's overhearing this conversation. So when they drop him off at the sheriff's department, Marcel drops Cavett off at the officer's quarters, and he goes over to his quarters. He lived on base, and he wakes up Marcel Jr. to show him some exotic material. I think Brazel goes into the sheriff and goes, holy shit, Sheriff, you're not going to believe. They caught themselves a flying disc, blah, blah, whatever. And that brush fire started out very locally, and before Blanchard, the commander, knew it, he's getting calls from the Roswell Daily Times and whatever. Hey, what you boys find out there? And he hasn't been fully briefed from Marcel just yet. Okay, what in the hell do we have? And I think that brush fire started locally. Okay, and Blanchard had a real PR problem on his hand, and I think he was trying to get guidance from somebody, so he pushed it up the chain of command. This is my theory. I think someone in the chain of command goes, oh yeah, right, okay, tell them you captured a flying disc, because either they didn't believe it and they didn't have all the material. So somebody up on the totem pole gave Blanchard the nod to go ahead and have Lieutenant Halt make a public PIO, public information officer, make a statement that they had captured a disc, because that story was already running through a small town like Roswell, like a brush fire, through a Kansas wheat field in July. Okay, and so that thing was getting out of control, and so they had to contain it locally. But it didn't contain it locally because it went out over the AP wire, and it went around people over in Japan were hearing about it 90 seconds later. So this thing got blown out of way, and so the Air Force had to dump water on it. And that's the you got to, once again, I salute the government, because are you ready for the headline news out of Los Angeles Times? Ramey empties flying saucer. Okay, and it wasn't a saucer; it was a balloon. And the headline was Ramey empties the flying saucer story. Basically dumped the moisture out of the saucer, and it was nothing more than a weather balloon. And the story died right there, and nobody in the press, once again, we're on a 1947 war footing, so whatever the government says has got to be true. And the reporters, of course, they're in bed with the military because they've been covering the war. They don't push the question, go, wait a minute, General, how did we go from a flying disc to a damn weather balloon? Didn't Major Marcel know anything different? Okay, and keep in mind, I think in chat, Dante or Pigpen brought it up, nobody was disciplined. They all got promoted. Blanchard became a general, and Marcel went from a major to a full bird colonel and got the choice of his base. He admitted that. It's proven. His military discharge paper shows him as a full bird colonel, and he was working in the Pentagon, I believe, and Blanchard became a general. Nobody, okay, was able to tell these guys, and you got to ask yourself, now, wait a minute, we're talking about people that are supposed to be highly intelligent. We got a nuclear air force, blah, blah, we got all this top secret. He's in charge of security, Marcel was, and somebody, a private, a sergeant, a lieutenant, a cook, how about the janitor goes, hey guys, it's not a flying disc, it's a freaking weather balloon, it's a balloon. Nobody was able to recognize it. And then, Dr. Scott says, hey, we got evidence that they flew the material to Wright Pat. I got to laugh because, all of this big habdoo and all this expense and effort put into flying this material to Wright Pat, and nobody, not even the pilot, goes, hey guys, why are we taking this balloon to Wright Pat? We know what balloons are. If you want one, we got one at Wright Pat. I'm sure Roswell probably had 4 or 5 of them that they could have supplied them with.
Kenny, we are running out of time. We've actually ran out of time. See what happens, Irina? He loves Roswell. You can tell.
I do, because it's got to be answered. Damn it, it's the hinge pin. Damn it. No, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Irina, can you tell our listeners where they can pre-order your book?
They can get it from Amazon.com. The name is UFOs Today, 70 Years of Lies, Misinformation, and Government Cover-Up. If they put that in italics and look for it on Amazon.com, they can probably pre-order. I think they can pre-order if they get on the UK part of Amazon.com. If they're in the United States part, I think Amazon said they would notify people when it comes out, when the book comes out. And I'm going to try to see about changing that so that you can pre-order it all over. But it will be in Amazon.com at least by June the 1st. And the way to find it is to put the title in italics and look for it.
Very, very cool. Very cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show. This was awesome. Very, very enlightening. A lot of information I learned about some of the major cases that I didn't know happen, and that's what's fun about these type of shows, Irina. When you get some like-minded people together, you learn things. It's awesome. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, Dr. Scott.
You.
Appreciate it.
Well, I sure appreciate it because I learned a lot too.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, so everybody, thanks for listening to Paying Radio, and we'll be on next week with another fun and enlightening show on the unknown. Hang in there and paying your head, everybody. Good night.